All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode. Today, I am sitting with the man, the myth, the legend, Todd Youngblood. Todd, I actually want to jump right in because I've known you for a number of years now, but over the last 5 years, I would say your business has gotten to be a very integral part of this community. And some of your background is amazing. So let's just start with the beginning so that people can understand who you are. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what is your particular zone of genius?
Yeah, great question, man. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me on. So, my background started my first company more than 25 years ago, T2, with my wife and partner Tara. And from our very first day, our calling was opening markets and creating opportunities. So we originally started helping international companies break into the U.S. market by figuring out the new channels of trade and new product strategies to help them grow their business. So over the last 25 years, we've developed over $2 billion of revenue for our clients. Started our own operating companies, exited multiple companies. We've done a lot of crazy stuff, but it's all been generally around international trade and scaling businesses.
It's interesting because this is also a family business. So this isn't just you, not just your wife, it's the whole family. So we'll get into that in a moment, but I want to kind of go back. So before this world of multiple deals, before you decided this is the route you wanted to go, what the heck was Todd doing before his own business?
So I did, right out of college, worked with my uncle, the original waterbed inventor, a very amazing business person, visionary, running a small sporting goods company in Santa Rosa, California. So Sonoma County, beautiful country, beautiful place to live. Worked for him for a couple of years. He sold his company, so I saw kind of my first transaction at probably 22, 23 years old. A move with a new company to St. Cloud, Minnesota, and my job was as a product manager to help the new company understand my uncle's products and integrate it into their business. So that led me into sales and marketing. I was typical young guy. I'm like, how do I make more money? How do I move up in the world? And the consistent answer was sales. Generate revenue. Your place is always is safer and revenue is always bigger. So got in at probably 24 years old, was running a $30 million territory for the company, running 16 sales reps, and then eventually got burned out in sales, traveling all the time. Kind of rinse and repeat at a new company in St. Louis, also in the sporting goods company. And that's when I got exposure bringing Eddie Bauer products into Target, so managing the relationship between Eddie Bauer and Target. And we were the supplier, so grew that business from $2 million to $40 million in about 18 months. So we had a lot of really fun, dynamic growth opportunities and experiences at a super young age.
Jeez. Okay, so let's go back to the very first thing that you said. Your uncle was the original inventor of the waterbed.
Yeah, man, 60 years ago.
So you were growing up in a house with an uncle that was, this takes me back, because I'm thinking of TV shows that like remind me of that time. I'm thinking of Three's Company, walk down living rooms and color everywhere on the walls, right?
Yep.
But so hold on a second. You grew up in a house. Did you understand what your uncle had created, or that because this was a new thing? This is kind of like saying, what do people want when there was the Model T was coming out and people were saying, I want faster horses. This
Right.
man goes, I'm gonna put water in a bed and people are gonna sleep on it. What was
nuts,
that like?
Man. It was crazy. No, they definitely didn't really hit you as a kid. You grow up where you grow up. Your family's always weird. You don't know where you're coming from. It doesn't matter if it's from affluence or poverty or big family, small family. Your family's your family, and that's, you just kind of grow up with what you know. But yeah, it was a wild experience for him. The waterbed genesis was his thesis project in graduate school in San Francisco.
Wow.
And he needed to come up with a project to kind of wow his professors to graduate. He started with a Jello chair. It was literally a chair made out of like cornstarch and water. It turns out having a 400-pound chair in your living room, not very functional. But yeah, the waterbed craze was wild. It was wild. So he was coming to our house. We lived in Florida and he lived in California. And he'd come to our house with his suit, his briefcase, cell phone, and obviously very successful at a young age. He was just graduating grad school when he invented the waterbed.
So. That is so amazing, man. Okay, so Let's move into, you moved to Minnesota, and one thing that a lot of people don't realize about Minnesota, from a distribution and retail space, that's kind of where everything was and is in the United States. What did you learn going from California to going to Minnesota, which is a top retail space, about the industry of products?
Yeah, well, it was a lot colder.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
You know, I think I learned a ton in that whole. I'm a curious learner, and I think that's one of the things that's really served me well as an entrepreneur. And frankly, I think that's one of the things that really we connect on is we're all in whatever room I'm in, I'm looking to learn.
Yeah.
And so whatever business meetings are happening, whether customer presentations, whatever the scenario is, the person in the room that's absorbing the most information is going to be adding more value over time, right? Their whole lifetime experience. So it's going from my uncle's company, small entrepreneurial 8-person company, moving into a publicly traded company, a division of K2 Skis. They had quarterly reports, they had published financials. We learned a ton. We learned a ton about business and a lot about kind of the building blocks of what drives business. You know, as far as Minnesota being kind of central point for distribution, being along big freight lines, freight trade lines or routes. You know, we got early, experience into Target as far as what they were doing at the time. Yeah, it was fantastic. Still a ton of 3PLs operate out of that, kind of northern Midwest area.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a neat place to live.
And for those who might not know, what is a 3PL?
Third-party logistics, so contract warehouses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And it's interesting because a lot of people don't realize that the way the United States is built out, that is one of the central hubs where everything kind of goes for the rest of the United States. If it's done there, from a logistics standpoint, it can go anywhere. I'm curious, though, you've also had a chance to travel internationally.
Yeah.
So, I've had people who I've gotten to know who've kind of talked to me about when they go to different countries and they see what logistics looks like in different countries. They're like, why are we not?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
When you went to China for the first time and you saw how not only the logistics are ran in a building, but how they have logistics set up in the country. A lot of people don't realize they built the country a certain way so that all of the logistics sit in one particular spot. Talk about the first time you got a chance to go see that, and what did that do for you? Because I would imagine for you being a systems person, somebody who thinks in logical order, it had to be either mind-blowing or going, I knew we could do this, I just hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, it was wild. My first trip to China was in 1999, and for anyone who's been doing international trade or trade with Asia for a long time, they'd be able to think back that a huge percentage of the freight out of China used to originally go through Hong Kong. And so we could see, like in real time, we would always typically fly into Hong Kong because I was going to southern China, Guangzhou and Shenzhen. And so I'd fly into Hong Kong and then I would take a train or a ferry or whatever to get into China. In Hong Kong, you could see the shipping lanes and the ports of Hong Kong slowly diminishing over time as China was building out their infrastructure. China built their infrastructure around where their trade routes were. So that's how they developed deep water ports in so many different cities along the coast. They developed their train transportation system to be able to move cargo further into the country as they knew the manufacturing footprint was moving away from the coast into lower cost areas. And back to the freight, the trade lanes, that's where China has negotiated deals on the continent of Africa to be able to come in as a third party and develop, more direct lanes, more efficient routes to the deep water ports the country can serve. So I was in Kenya probably maybe 10 years ago, and the contracts all across Africa were just exploding with Chinese companies. And it's happened a lot more probably over the last 10 years, where they come in and they'll literally build out the infrastructure on contract to bring in their own machinery, their own labor, their own materials, and build 2 or 4 lane highways throughout countries just to develop their infrastructure. Generally, it's for trade improvement.
Yeah, and it's interesting now that we sit in a time where infrastructure in America, to me, is still lacking and behind. From your perspective, what would you say should be a focus logistically and trade-wise that we should have in order to just, I won't say catch up, but improve the way we do things today?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? So in a capitalist society, we're expecting kind of companies to make the bets and pay the investment to make infrastructure work for the system. But when you're profit centric, if it doesn't make sense for the rail line to give up access to their rail lines to other companies to be able to improve the efficiency, as a country, we have to continue to work on rail, moving freight efficiently. I think some of that's coming with, autonomous vehicles. We get autonomous 18-wheelers that at least can do the long mile routes, and then they come into hubs where it breaks it up. A lot of that's in process. So I think our government needs to get out of the way of, kind of silly legislation. I think the companies need to be super efficient about, well, do we need to solve every last problem? Do we need to worry about an 18-wheeler navigating Manhattan? Or is it okay that we get it from, Topeka, Kansas to Oakland, California, or Sacramento, and just get the main miles covered, go to outlying DCs, and then break the freight there? So definitely we have to figure out, in this huge country we live in, how do we move goods more efficiently? Because we're not on pace with that. We're definitely behind.
Yeah. So let's move into your story. So from Minneapolis, talk to me about what was the first time that maybe acquisition even entered your mind, and what was that first acquisition that you went after?
Yeah, so the first one, I was an employee in Minnesota. The company was in camping and outdoor gear. Stearns Manufacturing was the name of the company. Eventually became a division of Coleman. We acquired a backpacking company called, it was in Bozeman, Montana, and it was just a small backpacking company. They wanted to be in the gear. Dana Designs was the name of the company. And it was first time, so I saw them integrate my uncle's company as an acquisition. I saw them acquire another small company. It was almost an acqui-hire. I don't think they wrote a big check. So we got to see what happens with an undercapitalized company when they get capital. And sometimes the founder's just looking for their next gig, right? They're just tired of drowning in bills. So got to see kind of an acqui-hire, small check, but it kind of gave the founder a job and a way to grow their business. And then really the next one was when I moved on to St. Louis. We got to see more transactions happen. And that was with Kelwood was the parent company, clothing and apparel brand that somehow ended up with the division I worked for, which was American Recreation Products. I worked for the division of Wenzel. They had Kelty, Slumberjack, Sierra Designs, a whole bunch of brands. So we got to see how brands could act autonomously with a single P&L roll-up, and how that our division rolled up to a bigger parent company.
It's interesting because a lot of times, and I remember this even from my first acquisition, I think there's something, I guess I would call it powerful or just unique about the opportunity to acquire.
Yeah.
But I want you to speak to this for a second. Like, it's not just that you were in the company and you're watching these companies merge and then you see kind of like a portfolio, but there was also like this idea of two people sitting down and creatively coming up with a plan that might not necessarily be traditional.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what an entrepreneur needs to understand, or somebody that's looking to go acquire their first business or thinking through this. What mindsets do you have to be open? What mindsets do you have to either kill or remove in order to realize that there's actually creative ways to still strike a deal and move things forward so that two companies can either come together or you can acquire as the new operator and grow it yourself?
Yeah, great question. I think so. We've probably been around 50 different transactions on buy side, sell side, or as a broker in the middle. And I think it first starts with what's the mindset of the investor. Are they a value investor? They're looking to buy something for cheap and sell it for a bunch of money. Are they a builder where they want to get into a business and they see the value of a joint entity building something bigger, new channels of distribution, new products, new customers, whatever that scenario is? Are they selling more products to the same guys because now they have consolidation and they get some operating leverage? Or is this acquisition going to offer them whole new channels or different ways to grow their business? But understanding the mindset of the investor going in, I think, is essential to knowing if a deal is even to be had. if you're going for someone that's a value investor to acquire a very entrepreneurial company, it tends to be bumpy. Because entrepreneurs tend to be, and this isn't a 100% statement, but they tend to be more open-minded, a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more risk-taking. And so that tends to be a higher conflict with a value investor that's looking to squeeze every dollar out of every spend and make sure they have traceability, trackability. That is a conflict waiting to happen. For companies that are builders, they typically have more DNA aligned. Now, for a value investor acquiring, say, a failed portfolio company of private equity, or for truly getting something of value, they typically, their best targets would be employee-run companies. So they've got an independent board, they've got hired guns that are running the company, a team of employees. They might be extremely loyal, but you've stripped out the entrepreneurial element and kind of a little bit, I hate to say soul, but the personality driving the business. Value investors typically tend to be much more successful investing in and acquiring companies that have a independently run, employee-based talent pool.
You know, it's interesting because I remember the conversations that I ran into when I went after my first one, and my first one was co-founder led. And what I did not account for in my first one was that, one, there would be maybe a potential conflict. And I think what you're speaking to is the institutional knowledge that when you try to remove a value-based, entrepreneur, you're actually removing, I don't think there's anything wrong with the word soul, but you're removing the institutional knowledge of why and how the business runs. Sure. Yes, they put the right people in the right seats, but a lot of times that person is the reason that those people are in the right seats.
Sure. Absolutely.
Not just because they're just that good.
Totally.
When you've run into those situations, how do you make sure that particular entrepreneur is taken care of? And how would somebody go about speaking to them in a way that they feel seen and heard for what they've built? Because 9 times out of 10, especially, the silver tsunami is happening. These people have been in these companies 20, 25 years. Yeah. They may want out, but it's a way they want to get out. How do you speak to that?
You asked the question before, and I don't think I even properly answered it, but as far as like the zone of genius, I think when most entrepreneurs, even if they haven't heard the word zone of genius, they have general inkling of what that is, and it's whether it's their superpower, what are they uniquely best at. I look at zone of genius in terms of maximum market value. So every minute I spend in my zone of genius, I'm maximizing my market value. Every minute I spend out of it, I'm essentially diminishing my market value. When you look at a founder role or 2 founders coming together, an acquirer or a merger, I think it's really valuable for those founders or the senior executives, whatever it might be, align on their zone of genius and what makes them happy, what keeps them happy. A lot of times there's burnout's a factor on an exit. And so factoring in burnout, hey, do you want to be kind of the visionary and you have very low kind of day-to-day responsibilities, very low operation lift, but you can still be around, you still get to influence, you're in quarterly meetings or monthly meetings, but you don't have to carry the weight anymore. Typically, it's a problem on conflict when there's 2 people trying to carry the weight and they don't want to go in the same direction. It's like a 3-legged race, and the end side, the destinations aren't the same. It's not going to happen. So it's a 100% chance of failure in that scenario.
So tell me this: what surprised you most during your first acquisition process?
This is something I wrangle with all the time, but most people aren't transparent. I want to say aren't honest, and that's not really fair. But most people feel like they need to hide something to get the deal they should get. And so it always comes down to, and everyone gets super excited about a deal, you align, you get a term sheet, and then typically the bankers and the attorneys get in there, the finance guys get in there, and they are looking for 1,000 reasons not to do the deal. And then you go through a due diligence process. Essentially, it comes down to, of the deals we've done, there's always some landmines that are buried that people aren't being totally transparent about. If you're totally transparent about everything, I think the philosophy is if you're transparent about everything, maybe this deal isn't a doable deal. If they really saw my dirty laundry, will they still like what I have to sell? And I think that becomes the burden and the risk for the acquirer, whoever's writing that check, is do your diligence, understand that the people sitting at the table they're probably hiding something or not wanting to be transparent about something. A little bit human nature, a little bit, I like to think it's not them being absolutely, lying, lying souls, but there might be some of that.
But you didn't ask.
You
basically.
didn't ask, or you ask and they give you an incomplete answer
That's
that's
right.
not dishonest, but it's not complete.
That's right.
And unless you know how to get 3 layers deeper in the onion, you don't get the full answer.
Yeah.
So I think transparency is a tough one.
Yeah. What are your biggest fears typically before? What were they before signing your first deal?
I tend to look forward and just get so excited about the future. I don't feel like I had there was no real remorse. Like, hey, this is what we're going to learn. This is what we're going to do. As far as deals not working as expected, I would say when we sold one of our companies to a partner, it was a trading company that I ran in China for a decade. The partner wasn't as passionate about the business as I was. We had a pretty big earnout, and we couldn't impact the business the way we thought possible. So we couldn't see the upside that was baked into the deal, that made the deal doable. So that on the exit side wasn't as enjoyable. On the acquiring side, I'd say one of the most fun ones. Although this is a different question. We acquired an IP portfolio company to leverage the IP, and we came up with a great kind of acqui-hire scenario. We acquired the IP. We brought this person on board for like about a year to develop additional IP based on their know-how. It was amazing. It built the portfolio value significantly, like a 10x value increase immediately based on kind of the nuances of the deal. They added value. And, they got a big check they wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Nice. So, two-part question here. What was the company that you did your first acquisition on? What was it, and what was it about, and what did it do? But I'm also curious what was the first thing you improved or changed once you took ownership, and why?
So the first acquisition we did was a company that had distribution in Italy. 2 guys based in the U.S. They were leveraging an existing relationship in the Italian market. So we acquired their company. The first thing we did was pretty much remove them from everything. They were good idea guys, not great communicators. They kind of thought they thought they made money through lack of transparency by just getting deals done and kind of telling as least amount as possible to be able to kind of hoodwink the customer into writing checks. That's just not our way of doing business. So because we could foresee that future conflict, it wasn't a surprise to them, but it was a lot faster than we all expected. The way they communicated just wasn't a way that I could sort of put my name behind. So I'm like, hey, this has got to be transparent. It's got to be honest. It's got to be straight up. And if you can't communicate that way, maybe you just shouldn't be involved anymore.
Yeah. Did you have a mentor or a guide when you first had this inkling to go acquire a company?
No, I didn't. Probably my longest standing mentor was a guy, is a U.S. guy, ran his own. He basically transformed his parents' company. It was electrical cable and wire, and they were making it in Indiana. Early days in Home Depot. He was an older guy. He took it over for his dad, and probably in the 70s, right when Home Depot was kind of coming on strong. And so we would meet up in Hong Kong. He eventually moved to Hong Kong, set up manufacturing in China, owned and managed his own factories as an American overseas. Spent a lot of time with him. And so I think, a lot of it was go with your instincts, go deep, run, how do you take care of people right so that they're back around, they've got your back when it comes down to it. So yeah, Fred was my mentor for about 10 years. So anytime I get stuck in a problem with cash flow issues or what do I do about this? I set up my first China company in 2004. I had to go to the China government, file all the paperwork, set up overseas bank accounts, hire staff that were on basically equivalent of Social Security in China. And it was some crazy stuff in my world. And I was probably, 30 years old, 31, setting up a China company it was actually technically a BVI-based company with a branch office in China.
Wow.
So, because I could get better payment terms from my customers if I was internationally based. So I went to one of my biggest customers in the U.S. and I'm like, hey, they wanted to buy a bunch of stuff. I couldn't finance it. I asked for a deposit. I'm like, no, they wouldn't give deposits for U.S. companies. So I had to set up an international company. They're like, but if you're, I'm like, wait, but if I'm an overseas company, you'll give me payment terms or you'll prepay? Oh yeah, okay, great. I'll get back to you in 30 days. Then went and set up a company in the BVI on the same company name, but it was BVI, and hired a company, a rep office to set it up, be the liaison office, and came back to them in 30 days and said, all right, I'll take your 50% deposit, and here's their international address.
Wow.
And they just parlayed that into setting up an office in China and then setting up, developing staff and all that. Yeah, it was pretty wild.
You seem to be the type of person that when you are fixed on something, you're ready to move and you want to move fast. Why do you think speed is important to get ahead of doubt?
So, number one, the increase in overall just knowledge in the universe, right? So if knowledge was increasing, doubling every year, I don't know what pace it is now with AI, but it's got to be faster. We would do two things. We would go fast, but we always developed, so for products we create internally, we would always use what we called our sponsor customer. We could have the greatest idea in the world until there's someone at the end of the day that's going to pay for that product. It's just my idea. It's not really commercial, right? So, but the moment we talked a little bit before we got on this interview today about 0 to 1, getting something 0 to 1, whether it's at scale, whether it's $2 million or the first customer, getting some dollars in the bank kind of validates that what you're working on is commercially viable. Is it a big deal? It's $100 million, $1 billion opportunity, or is it $1 million opportunity? Marketing can figure that out. But speed to market is essential for a couple reasons. I always think about it we've got 50 patents in our portfolio, and we always work on the auspices that there's 2 to 3 other people working on whatever we think is the best idea in the world, 2 to 3 people working on it exactly at the same time. The difference is who's going to move faster and who's going to operate better. There aren't that many unique ideas in the world. There just aren't. It's just a recombination of existing things and who's going to move faster and who's going to operate better.
It's interesting. There's so many examples of this in so many different markets. I think about Howard Schultz, like coffee's been around forever, but he turned it into a lounge.
Yeah.
That's the only difference. It's not that, and then, it's funny, it localized, right? You go to certain places. If you go to San Francisco or you go to Seattle, Pikes Peak, Peak coffee, right? Like there's certain, within that thing, there's certain cultures and different pieces. You think about what happened in the financial services space, right? Before it was all about, we've got the biggest footprint of banks all around. And it was like, that didn't turn out to be the greatest thing on the planet. Right. But Capital One came around and said, you know what, we're just going to turn them into lounges.
Yep.
And people thought they were crazy,
yep.
right? I worked in financial services and I can remember people like, that's never going to work.
Yep.
Now it started to work. To your point, I think it's it's typically called first mover's advantage, right? Mm-hmm. The person who moves first will get the lion's share of the market.
Yep.
As you've thought about that, and when you think back to your first acquisition, if there's somebody right now who's listening to this and they're considering stepping out of their corporate role because they've, in some ways, done it all, right? Mm-hmm. They're top of their game. But they need that next thing, and they're looking at acquisitions.
Yeah.
Speak to that person and help them understand from your vantage point, now that you've done it so many times, why acquisition is a lot better than starting something.
So I think it goes back to zone of genius. Creating something from the ground up takes more grit than you can ever imagine. Entrepreneurship is about solving the next problem. When you're acquiring a company, particularly with an installed management team, a little bit has to do with the investor's appetite on their expected involvement in the business. Are they operating the business, or are they owning and scaling the business? So if companies are coming in, there's a ton of acquisition targets right now, retiring founders, roll-ups, whatever the scenario is. But for sort of underutilized or available capital to go into a company, for someone with corporate experience where they understand maybe corporate structure, communication, them moving into an established business means they generally don't have to deal with the same chaos. Entrepreneurship is crazy. It's nonstop chaos all day long, every day. Now you can put structures in it and systems and all that stuff, but if you look at I can't remember the name of the book, but it's basically a business life cycle. And when you get, what got you here won't get you there. You get to 10 million, you plateau, none of your systems work, none of your people work. You fire all your staff because they're generalists. And when you get to a certain scale, you need specialists. And so all the people that got you there, they're like, the general manager, the bookkeeper, they were great. They were great because they kept their hands on everything. Well, at $10 million, or pick that number, them keeping their hands on everything means they become the bottleneck, right? So you can't get past them. Acquiring a larger business, particularly one at 10 million and over, they've already established the systems, the processes, the staff, the roles necessary to grow that company and for it to maintain its operational efficiency. As opposed to a startup, when you're creating something new, you need a lot of generalists. But the people that are well suited to do 5 or 8 different jobs, they suck at doing one job all day. Number one, it's not satisfying. But either they tend to lack the IQ or the focus or the experience to do that one thing extremely well. So you're able to move into a role of more specialists, generally more professional appetite. It also has to do, don't underestimate an investor coming to acquire a business to make sure that investment in that industry is satisfying to their soul. If they're going to conferences and other things, if they buy a dry cleaner, and their business, their next 10 years is going to be going to dry cleaner conventions. Well, if they meet 5 other people in the dry cleaning business and they don't have one thing in common, there's naturally going to be some friction with, man, I don't really want to spend my life networking in the dry cleaning business. I want to be around financial services. I want to be around the things, around the people that I connect with because I'm going to be able to share information more efficiently with.
Yeah, that's really good. You spoke about the teams. So tell me this, how do you manage an existing team and the culture after the acquisition? Because one of the things that I have learned through acquisitions is it's not just messy because you've got the psychological back and forth that's happening with the owner who's having to let go. You've got the transition, the transactions, the numbers, in some ways deal fatigue, right? That some people experience. But then there's the team. Yeah. And they're having their own experience of whatever is happening, right? Yeah. Pre-announcement, post-announcement, right? Right? How do you go about handling the team and that culture to get through that kind of that rocky, what I kind of call like that first 12 to 18 months? Because that can be sometimes a critical space just to stabilize the business after an acquisition.
For sure. I think it starts with coming in to learn first rather than to direct. And see if you can come in and be a sponge. Learn everything about that business. What are their KPIs they managed, they're running and measuring on today? What's their operating rhythm? Are they daily meetings, weekly meetings, monthly meetings? What's the frequency and the kind of the tone of the business and their operating model? I think it's really easy to come in and say, well, this is how I run a business. We're going to run it this way. And you can't yet anticipate what you're going to miss with a new operating style. It's like smashing in a new operating system into a computer. If you don't know the operating system how a business is being run today, you can't possibly yet make improvements. You don't know enough yet. So that is a little bit of friction. A lot of, anyone that's accumulated the net worth of 100 million plus, they've done a lot of things right, tends to come with a lot of confidence, rightfully so. But if that confidence is misplaced when they go into a new team, they can be disruptive before they really understand what all they're changing. So I come into it, learn first, come up with an action plan, be a earnest engager with all the different conversations and the different people to really understand the hidden secret sauce, the secret sauce that's driving the business that may not be on surface level.
That's interesting because I can remember times where you talk to certain people and sometimes the hidden sauce is this influencer who is like 2 or 3 levels down in the company, but they influence a ton of stuff. And you wouldn't know that till you got into the business, right? Or could be good, bad, or indifferent, but you might have a owner who is the lion's share of the client-facing business. And unfortunately, if that person leaves, you've got to deal with that, right? I'm curious on, you talked about, your zone of genius. How did your particular skills play a role in how you go about those acquisitions? Because I would imagine that there's certain parts where you probably feel like a fish out of water just because it's not your particular skill set. Yeah. but you know where your skill set really helps.
Yeah.
Where does that typically help for you when you look at these acquisitions?
You know, I guess I'm grateful that my zone of genius is really is connecting the dots, being an empathetic communicator. So understanding what different people need out of a conversation or out of a deal. And so whether it's two individuals trying to work a job together and they need to split up responsibilities, a vendor and a customer, or whatever the scenario is, to understand and communicate with empathy, understand the unique dynamics and put hairy deals together. So we've been involved in 2 or 3 undoable deals where people looking at it like, what you're offering is absolutely not doable. Either the company's distressed and about to go bankrupt and you're trying to sell it for a market price, or a patent litigation that's weighing down that no one wants to touch it because there's maybe liabilities that can't be properly assessed. We're really good at doing undoable deals and connecting the dots, but it usually starts with as deep an understanding as you can get about the apprehension that people are going into a transaction with, and then what are the sellers really looking for out of that transaction. Is it just a paycheck? Is it legacy? Is it making sure their team is safe? There's different motivators for different sellers.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone looking at their first acquisition today when, to be honest, there's a lot of noise out here about acquisitions right now.
Sure.
You look at what's happening with private equity.
Yeah.
They did this great buy-up from like 2020 to like maybe 2023.
Yep.
They can't seem to get off of certain, stuff in their portfolios right now. What would you say to someone right now as they look at, the acquisition world today?
Deals are happening all the time, and to say it's kind of a bad time to do deals, I think is not correct. There's always great deals to be had. It's all about the timing for the buyer and the seller, connecting back on what the seller's looking for out of a deal, and understanding the industry and being able to anticipate the storms ahead. How well is the business situated to be able to weather the next storm? You look at the craziness we've seen in the last 5 years between COVID, then it moved to supply chain challenges, then it moved to freight. So the moment supply chain was good, there was no containers. You moved from freight craziness, you had a moment of pause, and then you've had tariff challenges. Like, it's been a wild ride. It doesn't mean that companies aren't still making money. Doesn't mean there's not still growth happening and profitability scaling. It has to do with the market segment, and I think understanding the risks around the industry and how a specific operating company is well positioned to handle those risks and weather those storms. Is it people? Is it capital? Is it customers? Whatever it might be.
Yeah. First 30 days for someone who is looking and searching for a business to buy. What would you tell somebody that they really need to focus in on when they're looking at going down the acquisition path? Like, if they would just take the next 30 days and you were to give them, this is where you need to focus your time, what might that look like?
I think it depends on if they're starting with a complete white sheet of paper, or if they have some instincts of the industry they want to go to. So let's start first with the white sheet of paper. I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to go acquire a company and I want to make X amount of money or deploy X amount of capital. I think it would first start with back to what is their zone of genius? What are they uniquely good at? How does that align and become a benefit or a threat to whatever acquisition they would go make? We're going to say someone from finance. I've got someone in my family who's a perfect example. He accumulated significant capital, really eventually wants to get out of finance, leave Wall Street, wants to deploy that capital in an operating company. He's not an operator. He doesn't want to deal with small teams. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty. He's a finance guy. He needs to find a company, a services company, or something that's selling extended warranties, or finding something that's well suited so the people he's working with are people he knows how to communicate with. The industry is aligned to how he's been thinking for a long time. So I think anticipate and manage through the points of friction that owning an operating company are inherently going to bring. So when you get to those points of friction, you're bringing in some familiarity of the problems you saw before. If you're every year in business, whether it's 10,000 hour rule or 20,000 hour rule, there's problems after that 10,000 hour rule that you can solve in your sleep. It doesn't take, you're not pulling out a spreadsheet, you're not pulling out, ChatGPT to run through a scenario analysis. You simply know how to solve that problem because you've faced it hundreds of times. Bringing some familiarity in an acquisition to something that's aligned with previous operating experience or previous industry experience just brings an advantage that being completely outside of in a new industry, there's just new risks that they won't be able to get their arms around maybe as efficiently. Now, how hard do they want to work?
Yeah.
All of it's solvable. So the further you move from that zone of genius or that knowledge base, the more that investor or owner is going to have to work to acquire the knowledge and the perspective to be able to address those in situations.
It's interesting you bring that up because I've talked to people who have had to step back and let their ego get out of the way, because as they were going down the acquisition path, they thought, well, if I'm doing the acquiring, that means I'm also the CEO. And that might not be the case.
Right.
You could, to your point, be the CFO, but you found somebody who's really good as an operator. And you're like, you know what? I'll go in with them because I know they'll lead while I handle the money.
For sure.
And I think, unfortunately, not enough people realize that's an acquisition too.
For sure.
You don't have to be.
You don't need to be the operator.
You don't need to be.
For sure, absolutely. And it's back. Are they effective operators?
That's right.
Or are they visionaries? Or are they just effectively deploying capital? And so those are all different scenarios in which can be very effective and successful acquisition. Understanding the personal traits of themselves to be introspective enough to understand what holds them back and what drives them and why are they successful doing what they're doing, and then how do they leverage those personality traits to make their investment wildly more successful.
Yeah, this is interesting. So, what kind of ongoing friends and relationships and community have you been able to either create on your own or leverage as you've been down this acquisition path and as an entrepreneur?
Most of my social relationships still to some degree revolve around business. I spend, I would say 98% of my energy goes into my family and my business. Mm-hmm. Social connections have always kind of lapsed because I'm like, well, if I'm traveling all the time, I get home, I spend time with family, and I go back and travel more. So inherently, a lot of the business relationships have turned into friendships. I think there are great networks out there, and now with remote calls and connections, I've developed some great relationships with family offices and high net worth individuals because we speak a similar language of there's an intensity or an ambition that a lot of people don't have, and that becomes a common trait with high achievers. And so stay connected with those people, whether we're out connecting at a club in Vegas or we're kind of going on a crazy family trip. Those are the type of people I love to spend time with, free time with, because we're speaking the same language. We're looking at the world through similar lenses.
Yeah. I'll get you out of here on these last few. Talk a little bit about the company that you currently have, and talk a little bit about this jelly pad, because this was a launch late last year.
Yeah.
And you're moving forward. You've got some serious traction. Talk a little bit about these companies, and also help us understand, like, you're doing this with your wife.
Yeah.
So what's that dynamic like of having the two-headed monster running a consultancy?
It's been pretty wild. We've been married 30 years.
Wow.
We've been in business together for 25. So we run two main operating companies today. One is T2, Todd and Tara. My wife's name is Tara. So T2 is our consulting company that runs all of our basically functional activities. And so we use T2. We had a new startup, a Delaware C corporation with outside investment, raised a seed round over the last year for Jelly, which is, and that's GELI. T2 provides all the essential services, the manpower, if you will, for Jelly. So operational support, social media, website development, product development, all that stuff is the functional areas are run by people within T2. And then Jelly is an internal customer basically of T2. T2 serves a lot of other companies. What we get really excited about with Jelly, for some reason we put ourselves in the most painful position of creating a new product in basically equivalent of a new category because we want to work on breakout technology. Breakout technology is amazing because it can be industry transforming. But when you're that different, you're so different, people sometimes don't even know how to integrate you into what they're selling today. What's crazy about jelly is it's similar in some respects to my uncle's waterbed. All of the pressure mapped mattresses today all stay within like this 20% range of relatively high pressure. So if you've ever rolled over, your arm's fallen asleep, or you're tossing turning at night, it's because all the mattresses, it's measured in terms of millimeters of mercury. How much pressure is that mattress relieving when you lay down on it? 100 millimeters of mercury is basically concrete slab, hard floor. 0 is weightlessness. And the most pressure relieving mattresses today are about 65 millimeters of mercury. The jelly bed that we put out in market that just started shipping last September has 32.
Wow.
Excuse me, the pressure ulcer grade is 32, we're at 28. So we're more than 50% less than the lowest pressure mapped out mattress out there. What that does, it literally, Tara, her background is in physics and has done a lot in functional medicine, holistic medicine. We figured out that sleeping on the right mattress can literally add years to your life. You're causing tissue damage in a micro level when you're sleeping on a hard mattress, when you're sleeping on a mattress not well suited for you. We're so radically different. The mattress retailers almost don't even know how to bring us up in the conversation. We look different. They're really good at selling pretty perfect rectangles. We're not a pretty perfect rectangle. We're lumpy. We're imperfect and magical. It's a super, super fun project.
You know, she wrote a book on sleep, and I got a chance to go through it and read it. And what's interesting is that I always say this, like, you made a great point earlier, right? There's nothing that's new under the sun. But I think the difference is the unique bend that you have on that light, right? When you put it in the sun. And so, you know, you go down this path of the, mattress industry, right? I think of you guys like how, Mark Cuban was, tech first, and then he went to, bought a sports team, and then he's like, what's my next challenge? And he looked and he went, medicine, right? and he's crushing it, right? Like he's like, no, I'm taking down that giant, right? Yeah. You guys are kind of tackling your own giant. Yeah. How has that changed the dynamic of a home that is all in? And when I say all in, your wife works in the business, your kids work in the business. This is not like we shut the lights off at 5 o'clock and we go we come home and do something different. This could literally be
every minute,
every single minute. Yeah. How has that changed the dynamics of your home, especially when you have children that you're raising in this world at the same time?
It's wild, man. It's pretty much the only adult life we've lived, but we've figured out a couple rules to keep us safe.
Okay.
So two really main operating rules that we live and die by. One is we call our 51% rule, which really should work for all partners. And what we call a 50% rule, no partners are going to agree on all the things all the time. There's a 0% chance. But in every single time we've had a disagreement, one person cares a lot more about that issue than the other person. I really want to change our logo from blue to gray. I don't agree. And Tara will say, well, I really want to change the logo from blue to gray. I'm like, well, I don't agree, but I don't really care that much. I just don't agree. And so whoever cares the most gets 51% of the vote. Because most of the time it's like, well, this has no impact on my life, my business, my operating areas. So we've used that rule, a ton of times. We don't use it that often, but usually when it gets down to a point of friction or a point of contention, okay, I don't agree, but I don't really care that much. Okay, great. Then that person that really wants to win or needs that win, they get it.
Yeah.
And you back them up on it. The other rule is our 8 to 8 rule. So entrepreneurs work 7 days a week, right? It's just on my mind all the time, pretty much 24 hours a day. But I'm a late night guy, so I'm usually working between till 11 or 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to hear about whatever Tara's been thinking about all night at 7 a.m. I don't want to hear it. Now, so she can start talking about what she's been processing all night at 8 o'clock. I need to stop talking about what's on my mind at 8 o'clock. And so 8 o'clock at night, I have to shut mine off because I'd really like to come in at 10 o'clock and tell her about all the stuff I've been working on. She's like, I can't have it. Nope, because she's an all-night processor. She's literally learned how to computate and develop ideations throughout the night. So her sleeping time isn't like blackout, I'll see you in the morning. She's she's problem solving all night long. So she has some new problem that she has to work on that she's not anticipating. It's really disruptive for her sleep. She stays awake or she sleeps lightly and she's thinking about it and wants to hit me with a pillow at 6:30 in the morning. So 8 to 8 and 51%.
I like that, man. 8 to 8, 51%. Man, this has been awesome. Lastly, when you think about the opportunities that exist today, you talked about there's always an opportunity for a deal to get done, right? What makes you optimistic about the future, and why do you keep going when you've done so much already?
Oh man, there's so much change happening with with AI and what you can do. It's an incredible time to be alive. If Bill Gates is right and AI is more like electricity than a computer, like what was the world like in the early 1900s and the late 1800s? Holy crap, man! We're about to see the most transformational changes we've seen in human history. And it's going to happen right now in front of our eyes. So if you can put yourself in a position, and acquirers acquiring an antiquated company or a company that has low tech involved, and they can add tech to it, what's their operating leverage they can get out of introducing tech into a low tech industry? The types of things that people can do in business today. We've now have our first $1 billion one person company.
Yep.
It's happened, right? It was being talked about that would eventually happen at some point in the near future. It's happened. You create $1 billion valuation as a single person company. There's going to be some wild stuff we're going to see. And frankly, my favorite hobby is still business. I just love this stuff. It's what I think about all the time. Every time I'm touching products or touching services or just driving a car, it's all around you all the time. The question is whether or not you engage with that information.
Yeah. Well, listen, Todd, thank you so much, man. For those of you who've had an opportunity to hear this, down in the description, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to put information to T2. Hey, if you need to sleep better, you definitely want to check out the Jelly Pad for sure. We'll provide that information. But Todd, thank you just so much for the amount of years that you've put in, because I think, a lot of times most people will think like, cool, it's what he's doing now that's great. It's like, no, he's not an overnight success, right? Overnight took about 30 years,
Yeah.
right? But this is so cool the way you've done it. Man, thanks for being on the show. For those of you who are listening and watching, listen, I want you to get everything you can. Share something that you learned from Todd in the show today. And man, we will see you guys in the very next episode. And man, just Todd, thank you for your contribution to business.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks, man. Appreciate
Absolutely. Great job, man. You crushed it, dude. You freaking crushed it. Awesome, man.
Yes, man. That was great.